Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a file that honestly belongs to a very specific and a very volatile era of American history.
It really was an era where the lines between, Hollywood glamour, organized crime, and presidential power they completely blurred.
And right in the middle of it all is Dorothy Kilgallen, a journalist, a celebrity whose access to power was, well, it was unparalleled.
And whose sudden death in 1965, just 2 years after the JFK assassination, remains one of the most intensely suspicious footnotes in the history of that entire decade.
That suspicion is really the whole point of this deep dive, isn't it?
It is. It's our entire focus. Our mission isn't just to, run through a timeline of her life. It's to really extract insights from the sources you've shared to understand why. Why does this historical contention persist after all these years?
So we're looking at a few different angles.
Exactly. We're going to drill down into the controversial analysis from Mark Shaw, who really frames her death as collateral damage.
Which is a very loaded term.
A very loaded term. And we're going to pair his framework, which is meticulously researched, but, definitely subjective, with contemporary public opinion, and then weave it all into the extraordinary biographical facts of her life.
So what we're really trying to figure out is how a woman known globally for guessing guest occupations on a Sunday night TV game show.
Where's my line, Gene?
How she ends up dead, with her own attorney claiming she was silenced because of what she knew about the biggest political trauma of the century.
Right. We're essentially examining the true cost of unauthorized truth in the 1960s.
Let's start with who she was, because she was so much more than just a TV star.
Oh, absolutely. Precisely. Dorothy Mae Kilgallen, born in 1913, was a powerhouse. She managed to balance what on the surface looked like two completely contradictory careers.
She started as a journalist, and she started young.
Very young. Pre-18 at the New York Evening Journal. She established herself as a serious news hound right from the get-go. And by 1938, her column, The Voice of Broadway, was syndicated to over 140 newspapers.
140 papers. I mean, a reach like that is it's hard to even comprehend today. She was a media institution.
She was, but you're right. For most of us, she's permanently cemented in black and white, sitting on that panel for What's My Line every Sunday night.
From 1950, right up until she died.
And this duality is absolutely crucial to her power. She used her visibility not to dilute her journalism, but to actually enhance it.
How so?
Well, take her popular weekday radio show, Breakfast with Dorothy and Dick. It was co-hosted with her husband, Richard Colmar.
Right.
And she would expertly mingle, society gossip and entertainment news with serious, often high-stakes, investigative topics.
So she could charm the nation on a game show, get people to trust her, lower their guard.
Exactly. She'd get the trust of celebrities and public figures who might see her as just a TV personality, and then she'd turn around and use her column the next day to break ground-shaking political news.
She had both credibility and access.
A very, very rare combination.
Let's unpack that journalist side first, then. Because before she ever got tangled up in the JFK mess, Kilgallen was already defined by her willingness to, court danger and challenge sacred cows.
She had a long history of staring down powerful adversaries. The most famous example, and the one that really cemented her reputation for prioritizing truth over comfort, was her coverage of the 1954 Sam Shepard murder trial.
The doctor accused of murdering his wife. It was a massive media sensation.
Huge. And the public was largely convinced he was guilty.
But not Kilgallen.
Not at all. She provided this intensive, critical coverage. She dedicated her front-page column to arguing fiercely against the guilty verdict. She publicly says she was shocked by the jury's decision.
And she pointed to what she called serious flaws in the prosecution's case.
She did. She basically used her enormous platform to act as a defense attorney in the court of public opinion.
And that refusal to back down, it came with a real professional cost, didn't it?
A significant one. Her criticism was so pointed, so powerful, that a Cleveland newspaper actually dropped her syndicated column in response.
Wow.
I mean, that's a clear demonstration that she was willing to sacrifice reach, to sacrifice income, to stand by her own investigation.
She was lauded for it, though. The sources say she was described as a reporter who loved danger and excitement.
Yes, and she earned really high praise for doing a man's job and doing it better in what was, a heavily male-dominated field.
And she didn't just stand up to newspapers. She stood up to the mob.
Right. Her social circles were incredibly fluid. They included direct interaction with major organized crime figures, specifically the mobster Frank Costello.
Which begs the question, how does a society columnist gain access to that kind of insider information?
I think it really speaks to her unique position in the world. She was connected enough to be accepted by the highest echelons of society, but she was sharp enough to be trusted by the criminal underworld.
That's a dangerous tightrope to walk.
A very dangerous one. But that connection allegedly provided her with what our sources call critical insider information. It gave her access to controversial topics that were well beyond the reach of her peers. She understood power in all its forms, legitimate and illicit.
And she certainly wasn't afraid to confront powerful figures, illicit or otherwise. I mean, that high-profile feud she had with Frank Sinatra in the mid-50s is a perfect example of her courage.
That feud was epic. It really was. In 1956, she published a multi-part front-page feature, and again, front page, not tucked away in the gossip section, called The Real Frank Sinatra Story.
And it wasn't a puff piece.
Oh, not at all. It wasn't flattering. It was a deep dive into the darker, less polished side of the singer. It detailed his temper, his mob connections, his often abusive behavior.
Sacha, who was famously volatile and thin-skinned, must have loved that.
He immediately lashed out. Following the publication, he used his own performance platform, his nightclub stage, to make these derogatory comments about Kilgallen's physical appearance, directly to his audiences in New York and Las Vegas.
So this wasn't some private spat. This was a very public, venomous attack by one major star on another.
Exactly. And yet, Kilgallen didn't blink. She was accustomed to making enemies of powerful, thin-skinned men who preferred to operate in the shadows.
This history is so important because it establishes that she was not a fragile person. She was a professional combatant.
She was. But by 1965, the year she died, the danger was also closing in on the home front. We really have to look at the strained backdrop of her personal life at that point.
Her marriage to the Broadway producer Richard Colmar.
Yes, it was disintegrating.
The sources paint a very clear picture of a deeply unhappy marriage. By 65, Colmar was struggling with alcoholism. He had well-known infidelities. They were basically living separate lives.
They were. But the real tension, the sort of deeper issue, was this palpable resentment over Kilgallen's staggering success.
And this point is really important for understanding Colmar's potential role later on, isn't it?
It's vital. I mean, in the mid-century, success for a woman often came with a heavy sociological cost for the husband. Colmar was a successful Broadway producer in his own right, but he still suffered from the stigma of being in a secondary role to a wife who had achieved so much more fame, power, and wealth than he had.
That creates a profound, deep-seated jealousy.
Exactly. This wasn't just typical marital discord. This was resentment born of his perceived emasculation by her towering professional triumphs. And that detail, it gives him a complex, authentic motive in this whole narrative of suspicion.
So we have this perfect storm brewing, a powerful, connected journalist with a history of defying major figures, who has insider information from the mob.
And whose personal life is being eaten away by her husband's intense resentment.
And then she dives headfirst into the political powder keg of the JFK assassination.
And to really appreciate the scale of the threat she posed, we have to understand the world she was investigating. Mark Shaw's framework, which titles his work Collateral Damage, frames her death not as some isolated incident,
but as a consequence of something much bigger.
Right. A consequence of a much larger narrative, a dark legacy of power and cover-ups stemming directly from the rise of the Kennedy political machine.
Okay, let's clarify that for you listening. Shaw is asking us to accept a massive narrative of corruption stretching across years. How does he contextualize JFK's political rise?
He argues that while, yes, JFK's success was aided by legitimate family connections, and specifically Bobby Kennedy's pivotal organizational role, the rise itself was allegedly rife with scandal.
We're talking persistent accusations of election rigging, especially in key states like Illinois and West Virginia.
Yes, and deep transactional connections to organized crime. The sources suggest that the Kennedy campaign utilized these organized crime networks for their political muscle, particularly in those really close races.
Which immediately sets the stage for betrayal, doesn't it? If the Kennedys used illicit help to get into office, then that help would expect a massive return on investment.
Absolutely. And the sources point to what Shaw labels the critical pivot point. The double cross.
The double cross.
This is the core belief that Joseph Kennedy Sr., the family patriarch, allegedly betrayed the mafia after they provided essential assistance to the 1960 election efforts. The mob felt they had bought influence, they expected appointments, or at the very least, a clear path for their operations.
And instead, what they got was Robert Kennedy as Attorney General.
And not just as Attorney General, but as an Attorney General who launched an unprecedented, aggressive anti-mafia campaign.
So Bobby Kennedy essentially declared war on the very same powerful figures who had allegedly helped his brother win the presidency.
Precisely. This betrayal instantly generated tremendous tension and this deep-seated hostility from powerful figures in the criminal underworld. People like Sam Giancana and Sandro Trafficante Jr., they felt used and they felt exposed.
That creates an incredibly volatile environment.
An environment where political power and criminal vengeance were locked in a deadly cycle.
And the complexity of Shaw's theory only grows from there. He connects this volatile political environment to the tragedy that happened before the assassination, the death of Marilyn Monroe.
Yes. Shaw's premise links this political turbulence back to the catastrophic 1962 cover-up surrounding Monroe's death. The claim is that Robert Kennedy was involved in a romantic relationship with her.
A Monroe who was reportedly highly vulnerable at the time.
Very vulnerable. She was feeling like a negated sex symbol after her separation from Arthur Miller and was apparently deeply upset about her relationship with the Kennedys.
And the political damage of that relationship, especially if it was exposed, I mean, it would have been devastating to the Kennedy brand.
It would have been ruinous. Shaw posits that the cover-up surrounding Monroe's death, which was hastily arranged by high-level political operatives, was the first major institutional act of violence connected to the Kennedy ambition.
So he's suggesting that Joe Kennedy's decisions, starting with those alliances for the 1960 election, set in motion this devastating sequence.
A sequence of political corruption, violence, and betrayal, and it ultimately resulted in 3 tragic collateral deaths: Marilyn Monroe, JFK, and subsequently Dorothy Kilgallen.
That's a staggering argument. He's suggesting one corrupt action created a decade of political violence. It creates a narrative where this institutional decay is the backdrop for everything that happens next.
Including Kilgallen's investigation. And we know her investigation was definitely flagged at the highest levels of government. It's important to note that J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was actively monitoring her.
Wait. Hoover was tracking a journalist who reported on Broadway gossip. That implied they knew she was involved in something much, much bigger than celebrity dating advice.
It absolutely does. That surveillance emphasized her prominence and, critically, the perceived threat she posed precisely because of her probing journalism on these high-profile subjects.
The FBI understood her network of contacts.
They understood her network, particularly with figures like Costello, and they knew she was capable of obtaining highly sensitive information that could destabilize the whole political environment.
For the FBI to take a serious, active interest in a high-profile columnist in 1965, that means she was already seen as an antagonist to the official narrative.
And that she far exceeded the danger posed by other journalists.
So when you have the FBI interested, and you have mobsters interested, and you have a track record of taking down thin-skinned, powerful men...
You are operating in truly dangerous territory.
Which brings us to the centerpiece of all this.
Yeah.
Her deep, critical investigation into the JFK assassination.
This was the defining professional focus of her final months. She was one of the only journalists who publicly and persistently refused to accept the Warren Commission's findings.
And her determination to find an alternate truth, it manifested in a very specific, unique journalistic triumph. Her access to Jack Ruby.
She interviewed the killer of the killer.
That is truly unique access. How did she get through when so many others failed?
Well, it speaks to her celebrity and her contacts. She managed to secure multiple private interviews with Ruby during his trial. She used access that other journalists just couldn't get. Her celebrity status, perhaps ironically, may have lowered the legal and institutional barriers that stopped other reporters.
And when she interviewed him, her skepticism toward the official findings was pretty much confirmed right away.
Almost immediately. And Ruby's own words, which she reported, are absolutely chilling. He told Kilgallen that the people who had a material motive to put me in this position I'm in would never let the true facts come above board to the world.
That is much more than a statement of fear.
Oh, yeah. That is a direct, if cryptic, confession of involvement in a powerful, organized plot. Ruby was essentially saying, I'm a pawn, and the true orchestrators will prevent the facts from ever being known.
For Kilgallen, that quote wasn't just news.
It was the validation of her entire investigation.
And that confidence, it fueled her meticulous scrutiny of the Warren Commission. She started tearing apart witness testimonies and official timelines in her columns.
She was highlighting contradictions and inconsistencies that the mainstream press had largely, glossed over or just ignored. She was absolutely convinced the official narrative was unsustainable.
She expressed confidence that if Lee Harvey Oswald's widow, Marina Oswald, ever decided to share her full story,
Meaning the facts beyond what the Warren Commission allowed.
it would have widespread implications that would expose a high-level cover-up.
She truly was a journalistic outlier, a singular voice against the prevailing narratives.
She famously told someone she wouldn't stop the investigation. That shows a professional commitment, but it also sounds like a direct challenge to the most powerful people in America at the time.
It was a declaration of war on institutional untruth. And, it wasn't just a personal quest. She was tapping into a pervasive public mood.
Right. If we look at the immediate post-assassination sentiment, the sources from Reddit discussions reflecting that era say the Warren Commission was hotly debated.
It was. Many people truly believed right from the start that there was a second shooter and that the events involved a cover-up at the highest level. Kilgallen was just confirming the public's worst suspicions.
So that means when she died, she wasn't just a dead celebrity. For a large segment of the population that already distrusted the government, she was a martyr.
A martyr, yes. Her death became a confirmation of institutional malice. The whole environment was just toxic with distrust.
You had the back-to-back untruthful presidencies of Lyndon B. Johnson, the growing skepticism around Vietnam.
And then Nixon's impending rise. It had done a number on the country's trust. Kilgallen was seen by many as the only person with the guts, the money, and the contacts to break through that official wall of silence.
So when she died, the idea that she was silenced was the immediate default conclusion for so many people.
It was. Which brings us to the tragedy itself. Dorothy Kilgallen died on November 8, 1965.
And the official finding was a seemingly straightforward accidental overdose of barbiturates.
But the circumstances were anything but straightforward. The immediate and intense skepticism came from those closest to her, people who knew the stakes of her work.
People like her attorney, Melvin Belli, and fellow columnist Liz Smith.
Both of whom openly suggested she had crucial yet unpublished information about the JFK assassination that was serious enough to get her killed. The claim made by some of your sources is blunt. Her death was a murder, orchestrated to stop her from publishing her final report.
Okay, so if it was murder, the physical evidence should contradict the official narrative of an accidental overdose. What specific inconsistencies did investigators and skeptics actually find?
The forensic evidence is arguably the most chilling part of this whole story. Key evidence points directly to foul play, specifically the discovery of what were called spikes of barbiturates in her system.
Spikes. What exactly does that imply in a forensic context like this?
It implies a highly concentrated, rapid introduction of the substance, usually non-orally. If someone takes pills gradually, the drug levels in their system rise steadily. Spikes suggest that the drugs were introduced all at once, likely through an intravenous injection, or, as some of the more grisly theories suggest, through rectal administration.
So that rapid, overwhelming introduction directly supports theories of foul play over, say, a gradual suicide or an accidental overuse of sleeping pills.
It completely contradicts it, and the suspicion only deepens when you look at the official autopsy report, or rather, what was omitted from it.
The official paperwork itself is suspicious.
It's perhaps the biggest smoking gun regarding a cover-up. The initial autopsy report only listed seconal, one type of barbiturate, in her system.
Only seconal.
But subsequent findings revealed that two other powerful drugs were also present, tuinal and nembutal.
So why would the medical examiner leave out tuinal and nembutal? They were easily identifiable at the time.
Because the omission fundamentally changes the entire narrative. Listing multiple powerful sedatives and their concentrated presence in her system makes the official finding of a simple, accidental overdose of one drug immediately implausible.
And these drugs, nembutal in particular.
Right, they contain pentobarbital. And the sources note that pentobarbital residue was actually found on a glass near her. This implies she may have ingested a liquid containing the drug.
Whether that liquid was taken voluntarily or was forced on her is the pivot point.
It is. But the failure to report all three drugs is highly suspicious. It suggests an early institutional effort to minimize the severity of the drug exposure and just push the accidental overdose story.
Then you have the human testimony, which adds this crucial layer of fear to the whole situation.
Exactly. Her hairdresser, Mark Sinclair, who saw her often, reported that Kilgallen was actively afraid for her life, so afraid that she had even bought a gun for protection in the months leading up to her death.
Sinclair was the person who typically woke her up every day.
He was, and he found her dead in a state that he said was completely unlike any time he's ever seen her. Her fear was clearly not some abstract paranoia. She felt tangible, immediate danger.
And the physical scene of her death wasn't consistent with someone who just drifted away peacefully in bed, was it?
Not at all. She was found in her bedroom in what was described as unusual attire. She was wearing only a negligee, but she was reportedly sitting upright or placed in a position that seemed inconsistent with a gradual overdose.
And the room was cold.
Yes, the environment of her bedroom was described as unusually cold. Some investigators have suggested that this unusual coldness might have been related to slowing down metabolic processes to make the time of death harder to pinpoint, though, that remains speculative.
But taken together, all these details they contradict the narrative of a simple, peaceful, accidental death.
Completely. And if we connect this back to her final hours, the sources also point to her interactions with a so-called mystery man.
Her known activity in her final hours, phone calls, meetings, it suggests she was expecting someone or was targeted for a final interaction shortly before she died.
Yes. This mystery man is referenced in several accounts. It implies she didn't die alone and that the last person to see her alive was not her husband.
Which naturally brings us back to Richard Colmar, her estranged husband living under that cloud of resentment over her success. What role does he play in all this suspicion?
Well, given the deep-seated jealousy and the breakdown of their marriage, he certainly had a motive. And crucially, sources point to Colmar's comments about Kilgallen's highly sensitive JFK assassination file.
The file that contained all her unpublished, crucial findings from the Ruby interviews and her larger investigation.
That's the one. And it was conspicuously missing immediately after her death.
So the person who stood to benefit most from her demise, or who had the most to resent, was also the person closest to her who could have removed that key piece of evidence.
The narrative supports that. The suspicion around Colmar is severe enough that the sources mention highly specific and, frankly, grisly speculation about the method of her death.
I saw that. One source details someone specifically asking about the possibility of murder via an enema of drugs,
which is a known method for rapid barbiturate absorption. And in that account, a figure named Joe confirms yes.
That kind of detail, while it's unproven and deeply shocking, it really illustrates the extreme theories that were circulating among those investigating the case.
And it all stemmed from the pervasive systemic inconsistencies in the official ruling.
Right. So, regardless of whether you believe the Colmar theory, the mafia theory, or the political cover-up theory, the sheer number of inconsistencies.
The omitted drugs, the physical evidence of spikes, the witness testimony of fear, the strange death scene, the missing file.
It has all permanently crippled the credibility of the official ruling.
Absolutely. The absence of a believable, cohesive official narrative is what has allowed these conspiracy theories to endure for nearly 6 decades. The institutional failure to conduct a transparent and complete investigation is what led the public to instantly view her death as shady.
Let's connect this back to the broader atmosphere of the 1960s. We mentioned the erosion of trust, but how deeply did that institutional distrust actually run?
It was profound. The teenager who reported that his community thought Kilgallen's death was shady and that mostly everyone thought there was more to the JFK assassination than Oswald, that speaks volumes.
The public saw their leaders, from LBJ, misleading them on Vietnam, to the institutional dishonesty that would later define Watergate under Nixon, systematically eroding the foundation of trust.
They did. And in that environment, the narrative put forth by Shaw that Kilgallen's story is part of a dark legacy of power and cover-ups. It resonated, not because it was proven, but because it felt true to the pattern of behavior they were witnessing from their own government.
This also highlights the immense pressure that investigative journalists who challenge establishment power have always faced. David Talbot's work, for instance, touches on the concept of media that is unsanctioned by power.
And Kilgallen seems to be the embodiment of that unsanctioned media.
She was. She was operating outside the lines drawn by the powerful political and criminal elites. Her experiences and ultimately her death, they became part of a larger systemic struggle for truth in journalism. A struggle against institutional forces determined to maintain strict information control.
So she wasn't just a victim of a random crime. She was, arguably, a target because her network and her platform were too effective at uncovering unauthorized truth.
Okay, but we have to maintain some critical balance here for you, the listener. While Shaw's theory is incredibly compelling, and it connects so many threads of mid-century scandal, it is still a specific, subjective interpretation.
It is. It's one that requires us to link the death of a movie star, a president, and a journalist under the same broad umbrella of political malice.
And that's a big leap.
It's a huge leap, and it's vital to acknowledge that we are working with a historical narrative built on suspicion, not on settled fact. Critics of Shaw's expansive theory would certainly argue that while the inconsistencies in Kilgallen's death are real, linking it directly to RFK's alleged involvement in Monroe's death, or the mafia's revenge against JFK, well, it requires monumental historical leaps.
Right. You have other works, like Josiah Thompson's 6 Seconds in Dallas, that focus intensely on forensic evidence and ballistics.
And argue against such sweeping, broad political conspiracies. They suggest that perhaps the truth, while still hidden, is less globally orchestrated.
So Kilgallen's role in her own death remains deeply suspicious, but the identity of the perpetrators remains speculative.
Completely speculative. And that is the ultimate challenge of diving into this era.
Yeah.
Distinguishing between objective inconsistencies like the omitted drugs and narrative certainty that's based on feeling and circumstance.
What we can say for sure is this. Dorothy Kilgallen was a uniquely powerful, connected, and tenacious journalist whose life was abruptly cut short at the precise moment she was challenging the most powerful political establishment in America over the decade's biggest trauma.
Her story is just a stark demonstration of the hazards associated with questioning authority when that authority is deeply compromised. The sheer volume of suspicious circumstances.
The missing file, the conflicting autopsy report omitting tunal and nembutyl.
The key physical evidence of barbiturate spikes. The witness testimony that she had purchased a gun because she feared for her life. The spousal jealousy. The confirmed interest of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI.
All of it combines to create this historical narrative where the official story of accidental overdose struggles, even today, to achieve any form of lasting credibility.
It is a historical wound that is never healed.
It perfectly captures the profound suspicion and cover-up culture that really defined the 1960s in America. We know the atmosphere was one of immediate, deep distrust. So here's a final thought. If you consider the reports, often cited in the public records and speculation surrounding the JFK assassination, that nearly 200 people who were eyewitnesses or closely tied to the events in Dallas reportedly died shortly afterward, many in unusual circumstances, how much scrutiny should history apply to the tragic loss of the few journalists like Dorothy Kilgallen, who were determined to use their platform to uncover the deepest secrets of that devastating day? That's something for you to mull or explore on your own.